Rogues in Diablo 4 are fast, agile strikers who rely on blending melee and ranged attacks to clear out any obstacles in their way. They can even mix in a variety of tricks and traps to help tilt the situation in their favor. And they do come in multiple flavors. You can play as a trapper, a rogue who specializes in kiting groups of enemies into traps that'll slow and cause high amounts of damage. Or perhaps you're more of a slugger who wants to stick close to enemies and twist your knife in to bleed out your target. Or how about a marksman who picks off targets from a distance to stay out of harm's way? Or maybe you're more of a swashbuckler or a bandit who prefers to master both close-ranged and long-ranged combat. So if this sounds like you, the rogue may be a class to check out. So like I mentioned before, rogues are quick fighters who use energy to fuel their attacks. Now this energy is a resource that'll slowly regenerate over time, or you can use some consumables to add some giddy up to that recharge speed. Now, rogues are built to deal high amounts of damage. They use their core skills and their passives to make this happen. So making sure that you use those as often as you can is going to help make quick work of anything in your way. Now, rogues also have multiple movement skills that allow them to zip around the battlefield, but they do also have access to things like slow, chill, freeze, and stun crowd control effects at their disposal. That way you can lock down enemies. And lastly, rogues are a jack of all trades. We just described that. You can use straightforward attacks, you can lay traps, you can slow down enemies, or you can simply blow everything up with heavy damage, whether you're ranged or melee. But while rogues do possess a lot of strengths, they also have some key weaknesses that might just be a deal breaker for you. So for one, they're very squishy. They do require investing into dodge chance to avoid taking large amounts of spike damage. So for this, you want to make sure to choose dexterity as your primary stat, as it grants extra dodge chance and increases your skill damage. Now, rogues do require positioning and setups to be most effective. So if you aren't able to debuff your enemies or use certain skills because you're out of range, then your damage is going to drop off of a cliff. And these are all things to consider when choosing a rogue. But with that being said, let's dive a little bit deeper into this class and learn more about how it ticks. Let's start with the special trait. So the special trait for the rogue is their ability to equip 2 one-handers and a ranged weapon at the same time. Then you can swap between those depending on the ability that's being used. Certain abilities will require a certain weapon, and unlike barbarians and their arsenal system, you will not be able to choose which weapon to use for each ability, but you will still receive the stat benefits of all the equipped weapons, whether they're being used or not. Then we have the class specialization. So starting at level 15, the rogue can unlock their class specialization with a questline called True Potential. This starts in Ministad, and this will give you one option, with the other 2 options unlocking at 20 and 30. So your specialization can be swapped at any time, even mid-combat according to testers, which is kind of crazy to think about in terms of builds and things like that. Anyway, the specializations for us to choose from are combo points. So this is going to cause your basic skills to generate combo points, and then certain skills will consume these for extra effects. You also have Inner Sight. Now, this is going to cause attacking marked enemies to fill up your Inner Sight gauge. And then when this gauge is full, you're going to gain unlimited energy for 4 seconds. And then lastly, we have Preparation. So this one is truly unknown right now because it was not reachable in previous tests. However, the in-game achievement makes reference to using an ultimate multiple times within a short window, so speculation leads us to believe that this might be a cooldown reduction skill. And if we jump over to another Blizzard game, a little indie game called World of Warcraft, if we look at the rogue there, it also has a preparation skill. And this skill will cause you to immediately reset the cooldown of core skills. So this might literally just be a copy and paste of the World of Warcraft version. So we've talked a lot about special traits and class specializations. Let's move into what you actually do on your rogue, and that's skills. So when it comes to skills, you have a wide variety to choose from, and they're all divided into 6 categories. So 1, you have basic skills. These are low damage skills that have 0 cost and are typically used to generate resources or have an effect. Then you have core skills. Core skills are going to be the meat and potatoes of your build and your rotation. These are going to consume resources to deal large amounts of damage and hit more enemies per cast. You have agility skills, which are basically movement skills. These allow you to reposition, move through, or gain advantage on certain enemies. Then you have subterfuge skills. Now, these are specific to the rogue, and these are a cluster of skills that'll add utility to your build. These can be offensive, defensive, or a mixture of both. Next is Imbuement Skills. So these are going to imbue your next 2 attacks with extra effects, and they do possess a cooldown. And you can do things like add poison or cold to attacks, and they'll also possess a secondary effect that we'll get into here in a moment. Then we have Ultimate Skills. Now these are game changing. These are high impact skills that possess a long cooldown, and only one of these can be chosen at a single time. And to complement Ultimate Skills, we also have Ultimate Passives. And these are very similar. They're extremely powerful and they'll help define the playstyle of your build. And just like skills, only one can be chosen at a time. And I bet you're dying to know what type of skills the rogue will have. So let's break down everything that we know so far about what skills will be available. Now, for a lot of these, I'm not going to go into specific percentages or damage numbers because those are most likely going to change between now and launch. So for this guide, I'm going to keep it high level and use things like short duration or increased damage rather than saying 25% increased damage for 4 seconds, just to let you guys know. Okay, so let's talk about basic skills. So for basic skills, we have Puncture, which is a basic ranged attack that'll throw out blades, dealing a small amount of damage, and every 3rd cast will apply a slow to the enemy. Then we have Heartseeker. This is another basic ranged attack that'll fire an arrow that seeks an enemy and then deals a small amount of damage. But it also increases your critical strike chance against that target for a short duration, and it'll stack up to 5 times. Then we have Forceful Arrow, which is another basic ranged attack that'll deal a small amount of damage. However, every 3rd cast will apply vulnerable to the enemy for a short duration. Invigorating Strike is our first basic melee attack that'll deal a small amount of damage and increase your energy regen for a short duration. And our last basic skill is Blade Shift, a melee attack that'll deal low damage and allow you to move through enemies for a short duration, perfect for getting out of real sticky situations. Next, we have our core skills. Now remember, these are the meat and potato of your build and your rotation. They will consume resources to deal larger amounts of damage and typically hit more enemies per cast. So for our core skills, we have Barrage, which is a ranged attack that'll unleash a barrage of arrows that expand outwards, and each arrow has a chance to ricochet. We have Rapid Fire, which will rapidly fire arrows. Penetrating Shot is going to fire an arrow that pierces through enemies in a line. Then we have our first melee core skill, which is Flurry. This is going to unleash a flurry of stabs and slashes to enemies in front of you. And lastly, we have Twisting Blades. Here you're going to impale an enemy on your blades and make them take increased damage while impaled. Then after a short duration, your blades will return to you, damaging any enemies and pierce them on their way back. So core skills sound pretty awesome, to be honest with you guys. And it sounds like they have a good variety and a good balance between both ranged and melee. Twisting Blades sounds really cool, and I think that would be something that would be kind of interesting to build around. Next up, we have Agility Skills. Remember, these are movement/utility skills. So first, we have Shadow Step. So Shadow Step is going to cause you to become unstoppable and quickly move through the shadows to stab your target from behind. You're also going to gain movement speed for a short duration after this completes. Next, we have Dash, which is going to cause you to dash forward and damage enemies. Then lastly, we have Caltrops. You're going to leap backwards and throw Caltrops onto the ground, damaging and slowing enemies that run into them. So that wraps up our agility skills. Let's talk about our subterfuge skills. So for subterfuge, we have Dark Shroud, which is going to cause you to surround yourself with protective shadows. You're going to gain damage reduction per active shadow, and then once you take damage, your damage will be reduced and a shadow will be consumed. Next, we have Smoke Grenade, which is a smoke bomb that will daze enemies. Poison Trap is going to cause you to place a trap on the ground that will apply a large amount of poison damage to enemies in the area. And lastly, we have Concealment, which is going to cause you to vanish and gain stealth for a short duration. During Concealment, you become unstoppable, gain movement speed, and can move through enemies. Using an attack will break Concealment. Our next category is Imbuement Skills. Now remember, these are skills that are going to alter your attacks. They don't do anything themselves, but instead it's like coating your weapon with poison, shadow, or cold. So starting us off is poison, in fact. So your next 2 attacks are going to deal poison damage and then apply a poison debuff that deals damage over time. Shadow is going to cause your next 2 attacks to deal shadow damage and infect enemies. This infection is going to cause them to explode on death, which will deal damage to everything around them. Shadow Imbue also does increased damage to shadow infected enemies. So you're going to be able to infect them and then deal more damage to them, which will cause them to explode. Next up, we have Cold, and this is our last imbuement. So your next 2 attacks will deal cold damage and chill targets. Cold Imbue will deal increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. So again, this doesn't just affect chilled and slowed targets, but anything that is crowd-controlled, whether it's stunned or any movement impairing abilities. Our last 2 categories are our ultimate categories. We're going to start with ultimate skills. So ultimate skills, we have 3 to choose from. And remember, these are very powerful game-changing skills, but you can only take 1 at a time. So for your ultimate skills, we have Shadow Clone. You summon a shadow that'll mimic your actions for a duration and then deal a portion of your damage. We have Rain of Arrows, which will cause arrows to rain down over an area twice, dealing large amounts of damage each time. And lastly, we have Death Trap. This is a trap that's placed on the ground that'll deal a large amount of damage to enemies in an area when it gets triggered. So those are our skills. Let's flip over to our passives. So for our ultimate passives, we have Momentum. This is going to cause melee skills to grant a stack of momentum for a short duration if they hit a stunned, immobilized, or frozen enemy, or if they hit any enemy from behind. And when you reach 3 stacks of momentum, you're going to gain increased damage reduction, increased energy regen, and increased attack speed. Then we have Close Quarters Combat. Damaging a nearby enemy with a ranged or a melee skill will grant increased attack speed for a duration. If both melee and ranged attack speed bonuses are active at the same time, you're going to gain Lucky Hit, which has a chance to generate energy and deal increased damage when you damage a crowd-controlled enemy. This seems like a really good passive to take if you're going kind of that swashbuckler bandit route where you want to blend together melee and ranged skills. So if I'm a rogue, this is definitely something I'm looking at. Next up, we have Precision. This is going to cause critical strikes with ranged skills to grant you precision. You're going to gain increased crit damage per stack of precision up to 5 times. When you reach max precision, your next ranged skill is guaranteed to be a critical strike that also deals extra damage, but consumes all your stacks of precision. Just like the previous one mixes melee and ranged, this one seems to be focused entirely on ranged, whereas Momentum was focused entirely on melee. Now for our next 2, we have Victimize and Exposure. So for Victimize, you're going to gain Lucky Hit again. Now, when you deal direct damage to a vulnerable enemy, they have a chance to cause an explosion, dealing damage to themselves and nearby enemies. So if you're somebody who wants to stack up vulnerable and be a vulnerable based build, then this is going to work extremely well for you because you're going to have a higher chance of causing explosions and dealing large amounts of AoE damage. And then we have Exposure, which again is another Lucky Hit based passive. This one, however, is going to be when you damage enemies, you have a chance to reduce cooldowns of all of your trap skills by 25%. I know I said I wasn't going to go into specific percentages, but this one was considerable and is kind of the whole identity of this passive. So I figured, hey, let's toss it out there. 25% is pretty big. And then it's going to drop a cluster of stun grenades that'll stun and damage enemies, which is perfect for trapper-based builds. So if you want to be a trapper playstyle, Exposure is going to be one you definitely want to look at. So guys, overall, the Rogue is a powerful class. However, it does require you to implement strategy and to gain an understanding of all of their core mechanics to truly survive and maximize their potential. But once you do, you should be an absolute force to be reckoned with. Being able to move silently throughout the battlefield, being able to move through enemies, set up traps, drop caltrops, slow down enemies, blow them up with high damaging skills, whether they're ranged or melee or a mixture of both. This one seems to be truly a jack of all trades, and one that I'm very excited to see what sort of the higher end players come up with, because it's going to be really, really cool. So I want to hear from you guys. Is the Rogue the right class for you, or are you planning on another class? For me, I'm very, very, very biased towards the Druid. I love that playstyle. I've always been a shaman at heart, so that's one that I'm really, really looking forward to. But I do want to hear from you guys, so let's talk in the comments section below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like Diablo content, please consider liking and subscribing. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys next time.